Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening. Today, we're going to talk about that quote unquote failing schools list that was released earlier this year. That we've seen a lot of topics and a lot of comments on Facebook, some attempting to cast blame, some coming to the aid of the Birmingham Public School System. But today, we have Miss Sonja Smith here today. She's a Birmingham School Board member representing District 8. Also, Richard Rice is in the studio helping us just dissect this information and what does this mean to the community, because ultimately the success of our schools is dependent upon not just our teachers, not just our principals, but also the entire community. Miss Sonia Smith, how are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm awesome. Can you take a moment just to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes. So I'm Sonia Smith, and I am the District 8 representative for the Board of Education. So District 8 is going to be the 5 Points West community, and so I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, awesome. So one of the things that I have noticed on social media when I guess this report got released earlier this week, I've been seeing a lot of, I guess, negative comments, some blame. I've seen people who have come to the table to say, this is really a community issue. There are things we need to look at. But then the first thing I start asking, well, what does it even mean to be on this list? And then how does one get off of this list? And so I think there's a lot of discussion that can happen just from this report coming to the table. But I want to give a moment for Attorney Richard Rice to kind of dialogue with you on this topic.
Okay.
All right. So, Ms. Smith, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I know you're busy. You're involved with several projects outside of being on the Board of Education, so we appreciate your time. And I really just want to start with just the basic language of failing schools and just, talk to you a little bit about the definition. In preparation for the interview today, I looked up the definition here as it's defined by the Alabama Accountability Act of 2015. And basically, it states that a failing school is a public K through 12 school that is either of the following. It's designated as a failing school by the state superintendent of education, or it does not exclusively serve a special population of students and is listed in the lowest 6% of public K through 12 schools based on the state standardized assessment in reading and math. And so just generally, I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts on, this definition generally, and do you believe it's a useful tool, and if so, why, and if not, tell us why as well.
Okay. Well, yes, you are exactly right. I think we must be going through the same research in terms of the definitions. So, the way that I interpret that and the way that the list is created, like you said, is based on standardized assessments in reading and math. And for the purpose of the test or the results that were recently released, those are from the ACT Aspire exam that was given last year in the 2016-17 school year. And so the way that I describe it to people is, let's say you have 100 schools in the state of Alabama, and of course all 100 schools have to take the test. And the bottom 6%, so the lowest 6 schools in that list of 100 are the ones that are considered failing schools. So to me, I think by definition, it's a bit misleading because the definition makes it seem like, oh, well, these are schools that have not met a certain benchmark and therefore they are failing, where it's really looking at the lowest scores, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it does. It makes sense. And, the term, just the basic definition of failing is basically saying that something is missing, that there is some type of deformity, something is wrong. And so I'm just curious to know, what type of message is that sending to the students at these schools, to the teachers, the parents, the principal, and how does that affect the overall culture of the school? And what are your thoughts on that generally? I mean, I read a post as well on Facebook in which someone, basically said that the issue would be more described as educational inequality. And when you really look at some of the statistics behind what schools tend to fall on the failing list, you see that most of those schools are in highly impoverished areas and often are involving communities that are predominantly Black or historically disadvantaged and oppressed communities. So I'd just like to hear your feedback on that. What do you think about the term itself and how what message does that send to our kids?
Well, no, I'm not a fan of the assessment at all, the failing schools list, the idea of a failing schools list. I'm not a fan of it because this is something that's come from the legislature, and we also have from the Alabama Department of Education there's the report cards, which that information will be going out on February 1st. So it's, to me, there's no need for both of those. I think it's redundant. I think that it's something that we should appeal to our legislators to remove. And what you said about the effects that this hearing this has on children, students and teachers, to me that says a lot. Who wants to hear, oh, well, your school is failing, your teachers don't care about you? I was reading posts where people were saying, well, these teachers don't care about students and the board doesn't care about students and everyone is just here for a check. And if students are hearing that from their parents, they're hearing it from their friends, they're hearing it from even other teachers, community leaders, that's not anything to encourage a child to want to learn, to respect their teachers, or to value education. When in fact we have a lot of teachers that give their hearts to these students. I was at a school today, and a teacher telling me how they have a special needs student that comes to school every day, and she's special needs, and so her clothes are soiled. And every day she does what she helps the child to get a change of clothes, to get cleaned up, and every single day they go through the same process. And so there are teachers that truly do care about students. So, I hate any rhetoric that says all teachers don't care about the equality or the education of students.
Right. I mean, I completely agree. I just think that language is a very powerful tool, and it could be, we should use it as a roadmap to speak, or use it to inspire. We want to make sure that we're being truthful with our language to the extent that we accept where we are, but we should also, speak to where we want to go. And just the terminology failing schools is really, inadequate in helping us to do that, to remind us of our whatever positive attributes we have, and we can highlight those and use that as a way to inspire more people to act in that way. And you mentioned something about report cards that are coming out on February 1st. Can you talk a little bit about that and explain to the listeners the difference between the failing schools list and the report cards you mentioned?
So the Alabama State Department of Education has a report card. This is the first year the report cards will be going out. And for K through 8, those report cards are based on attendance, chronic absenteeism, academic growth, and academic achievement. And then at the high school level, it's also based on career and college readiness. And the last factor leaves me right now, but there are 5 factors for the high school level that come into the report card list. And so that's basically a report card for each school in the district, or each school in the state. And it gives certain weights to each of those categories, and then determines an A through F grading for each school, and then also for the district as a whole.
Yeah, so it seems like, and this is my first time hearing of it, but just based on the description you provided, it seems like this report card that would be coming out is a more holistic approach, and it takes into account of the fact that the schools really have to meet the kids, the parents, and the communities where they are, and we should really be trying to monitor what level of improvement there is from a year-to-year basis, as opposed to relying upon results of a standardized test, in two subjects as well. So that's very useful, and hopefully we can publicize those report cards when they come out at the first of the month. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the purpose behind the failing schools and the Alabama Accountability Act. Basically, it states that it gives students who are zoned to attend a school on the list of failing public schools an option to transfer out of the failing school, including transferring to another non-failing public school within the district. So, I mean, I just wanted you to kind of give your thoughts on, how is that option? Is that, I guess the theory is promoting competition. Do you believe that that's a valid theory, or do you think it's causing more harm than good?
I don't know that I wouldn't say that it promotes competition. It in my opinion, you shouldn't need to have magnet schools. You shouldn't need to have that loophole where students can then go someplace else. All schools should be high performing schools. So personally, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of that. But then it also becomes an issue of parents getting their students to those schools. I think that by law, the district is supposed to provide transportation, but let's say there's an issue and for whatever reason the parent isn't able to get their child on the bus or isn't able to meet the accommodations that the district provides. So then the parent has to go out of their way to try and get the student to this other school. So yes, it's great to have that, but it's also a Band-Aid. So it's a Band-Aid to what the bigger issue is. And to say, okay, well, we're going to farm these students out someplace else, I mean, that's a good short-term solution, but it doesn't fix the larger problem of getting all schools up to a higher level.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, and you talked about the underlying issue. I mean, the underlying goal obviously is to make sure all kids in all schools are promoting quality education, that each child there has an opportunity to learn. But what do you see as the root cause or like the underlying cause? I mean, poverty is one of those. When you look at the correlation between the poverty rate and the failing schools, then, it's almost undeniable. But what do you see as kind of the underlying cause? What do you think needs to happen?
I think there are two things that need to happen. I think parents need more support. We really need to work with parents to understand the value of pre-K and to get children in learning as early as possible. When you have some kids, a handful of kids that go through a pre-K program, and then you have other kids that come in and they don't know their shapes or their colors or any letters, you're already coming in, you're already starting the students off at a disadvantage, and you already have a wide variety within the classroom, and it's hard to bridge that gap because on the one hand, the teacher has to catch these students up that came in knowing nothing, catch them up to their pre-K level of where they should have been when they got to kindergarten, while also trying to challenge those students that came in prepared and then get the students to first grade level by the time they finish kindergarten. That is a lot. That is very difficult. And that is, in my opinion, a lot of what happens. It becomes, even the older the students get, the more difficult it is to bridge that gap and to keep students on track and to help to support them, which is why we see by third grade that our students are behind in their reading skills.
Right.
So I think the big long-term solution is that we really need to promote, push, and get as many students as possible involved in pre-K programs.
Most definitely. And so I also looked through some of the information on your website and your Facebook page, and you stated that as a school board representative, you will work together through ACTION. It's an acronym for advocacy, communication, and transparency. You will use these three tools to elevate Birmingham City schools, and I think that that fits directly into what you were just speaking about, giving more support to parents and to the children. A couple of the organizations that I've looked up recently, one is GPS Educational Services, and they take a holistic approach to educating students academically, socially, and professionally. They do a lot of grassroots advocacy in terms of going door to door, speaking to parents, and identifying what those specific needs are for each child, making sure that we're kind of tailoring the education process for the needs of an individual, which just makes sense. That's the way parents raise their children, brothers, sisters, even twins have specific needs or may identify better with one teaching method as opposed to another one. And then also another organization is STARE, which they basically do one-on-one tutoring with second graders because, you know, a lot of research is out there that basically says that if a child is not reading up to grade level by third grade, then, you know, they pretty much have lost that opportunity, which goes back to another point you made about early education. And so I just wanted you to speak a little bit about some of the partnerships that you're familiar with, or some of the organizations that you're familiar with, or, you know, some of the partnerships that you think should take place to begin to address some of the issues we've discussed in this interview today.
Yeah. Well, I think you have long-term and short-term solutions. The long-term, most ideal situation being that we are, you know, getting those students in pre-K, like I said, and also providing complete wraparound services for students. I think in the short term, and that's when you have these programs that come into place. Programs basically are a Band-Aid to the poor policy. So, you know, programs like STARE and some of the other ones that you mentioned are good in helping out in a short-term sense when implemented correctly and when you have buy-in and support from parents and from the community. And so I think that, you know, I think we mentioned that a lot of people have been posting things on social media about their opinions with this failing schools list. And I think that's where you can have somebody to come in and say, okay, well, let me get involved, or let me go to the school and see what they need or how I can support them. A lot of times people want to come in with their programs and say, okay, we want to do this. But it might not be exactly the way that the district or the way that the school is the direction it needs to go. So I think it's great to have organizations that care and they're passionate about children's education, but I do think that it needs to be a collaboration with the schools so that it's not in competition and confusing students.
Awesome. So, you know, we recently, obviously, you're new to the Board of Education. Several of your colleagues are new. We have a new superintendent. We have a new mayor, new city council members. What role do you see for partnership between the Board of Education, City of Birmingham, in particular in regards to pre-K? When you talk about wraparound education, a lot of that is, you know, kids are spending maybe 2/3 of the year in school for maybe 7-8 hours a day. So most of their time is spent outside of school is what I'm trying to say. And so, like, what role does the city of Birmingham have to play in that? What would you like to see from the mayor, from the city of Birmingham, to help with some of these programs you described?
Well, I think the role of our community is to support our students. I think it's a community effort. It's not all on teachers. I believe that it's a community effort. So yes, it is the role of the mayor to support and the role of the city council to be a champion for education, and parents to be there for their students, community members to become members of the PTA. You don't have to have a student that's at a school to be a member of the PTA. Anyone can go to a school and say they want to be a member of the PTA and help out. So I think that the community's role is to, when asked for help, when the schools say, hey, we need help, I think the community's role is to be there to provide that help. But I think also the community's role is to support our students. Our community is very passionate about what goes on in our schools, especially when something like this happens and you have some sort of incident. But, you know, back to what we said at the very beginning, the community also needs to be there when good things are happening. And the community needs to be there to encourage children when they're doing great things. And not just focusing so much on the bad, but also focusing on the good a lot more. And, you know, with the wraparound services, yes, you know, I have long said that it's difficult for a child to learn if that child is hungry or tired or, you know, there's so many things our children go through before they get to school. So, and we have so many smart, educated members of our community that can volunteer those resources or their time to maybe provide counseling services for students. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It could just be an hour, or but if enough people decide to do that or get their social organizations or civic groups involved, then that hour becomes a lot more, and it means a lot to the child that's involved.
Okay, good. I'd like to kind of pivot a little bit, same topic really, but just ask from a different perspective about some of your experience. I understand that you've worked in a charter school previously in a large urban area, with poverty-stricken area, and so can you talk a little bit about your experience there and how that's beneficial to you here now, and then also tell us why you do or don't support charter schools?
Okay. Yes. So I taught at a charter school, charter high school in Chicago. I taught, primarily had 10th through 12th graders, and the last couple of years I was there, I also taught ninth graders. I personally am not a fan of charter schools for a couple of reasons. One, because of my experience in the classroom and at a charter school. The way in the Chicago public school system, the way that the charter schools are set up, you've got the say your magnet schools, which are at the very top. You have your neighborhood schools, and then you have your charter schools. And so the way that the charter schools, they're perceived to be above magnet schools, but the way that I see it, with those charter schools, they don't get the same kind of oversight. So I always would describe them as being like the stepchild of the Chicago public school system, because there were things that could happen in a charter school that could be overlooked and could be ignored that wouldn't necessarily happen in a more traditional school. And I feel that there's really not a whole lot that's happening in a charter school that couldn't happen. There really is nothing that happens in a charter school that could not happen in a traditional public school. And back to what I said in the very beginning, if we're doing our jobs, then the need for charter and magnet schools should not be there.
Yeah. Good. Okay. And so I understand that you received your bachelor's degree in music. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I've heard several people speaking about the educational system here in Birmingham and how maybe we're not investing in arts, music as much as we should. What role do you see? Like things, some people call them, we call them electives, I suppose, and so that may indicate that it's not a core, course for us, but which implies that it's not as important. But how do you see that? What role do the arts play in making sure that we take a holistic approach to educating our kids and inspiring them, to be creative and innovative and things of that nature?
Well, you never know what's really going to touch a child. You never know. You never know how a child feels if they best can express themselves and can maybe cope with things that are happening in their lives. And the child doesn't know unless they have that exposure to playing an instrument or to the fine arts. So to me, I feel that it gives you a different perspective. It doesn't isolate our children. It gives us greater exposure and to just be more appreciative and be more open to things that are different from the norm. I was fortunate in that my mother grew up playing the piano, and so she insisted that my sister and I play. I stuck with it a lot longer by going and getting a master's in music, but I was fortunate in that my parents were really encouraging of me doing that. I was talking to someone recently that said that their parents said, well, writing is good and photography is good, but that doesn't really pay the bills. And I think that's something that, again, with the exposure and having more kids that are exposed to the arts and can appreciate the arts, then there wouldn't be that negative stigma, and more children might feel drawn to it and feel compelled to stick with it. But and I will be honest, it wasn't that it was within my school that I received my instruction either. My mom, like I said, she played at our church to make extra money to pay for me to get lessons. So I was fortunate in that respect. But I do think that it's a part of a complete quality public education is to have that exposure and opportunity for the arts.
Right. Well, great. That was a good answer. Thank you for that. I want to talk to you a little bit about just like curriculum from the standpoint of the fact that Birmingham is nearly a 75% Black city or African American, Asiatic people that live here, which makes Birmingham the fourth Blackest city, if you will, in the nation. Like, what type of unique dynamics does that present to educators, people that serve in your role on the Board of Education? Do we have some responsibility or opportunity to craft a curriculum that is more specific to the unique experience that we live here in the United States? Or do you believe that a standard kind of national core curriculum is sufficient to give our kids the tools they need to be successful?
Well, we're not robots, right? Like, we're not all the same, and we weren't created in some test tube to all be the same exact people. And you can't approach education like that either. I don't think you can approach education from a standpoint that every child should do this, every child should do that, every child should learn this way, because every child is not going to learn the same way, and every child is not going to develop at the same rate. And so you have to meet them where they are so that they can be most successful. Because if they're not successful in school, then you're going to meet them on the other side, and it's not going to be a good situation.
Right, definitely. And I saw that you were. Did you attend college at Malcolm X College, or were you a teacher there, a professor?
I taught there.
You taught there, okay. And could you just talk a little bit about your experience there?
Yeah. I taught group piano, music history, music theory at Malcolm X. And honestly, it was it was a great experience for me. I loved it. I went there after I left from the high school where I was teaching, and I had some of the students that I had from the high school that were over at Malcolm X. Malcolm X is a part of the city colleges of Chicago, and I think it's like 13 city colleges in the area. Each one has a different field specialty. So Malcolm X was really big in nursing, and it's actually located right across from the United Center. On the west side of Chicago. And, I appreciated the department chair that I had while I was at Malcolm X. She was very encouraging, very supportive. Any ideas, how crazy they might sound, she was supportive of me, doing. I was all about, let's, make this come to life, right? So music is best learned through experience. So let's go to events and let's bring people in. Let's make this more tangible. And she was really good about being supportive. So to me, it was a great experience. I have nothing bad to say about it.
Great, good, yeah. And that's good. I thought that you would. I didn't know to what extent the curriculum there was specifically tailored to specific communities or not, but I can imagine that was a really good experience. And you've done a really good job of answering the questions that we presented today. I think we covered all the topics that I'd like to discuss. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Any type of request? I think the request that you put out there for anyone to join the PTA is great. Because from the reports I've heard, we've had very low participation in parent-teacher association here throughout Birmingham. So that's one good call to action. Is there anything else that you would recommend or ask of our listeners?
Yeah. So I did mention reaching out to the schools to see what support you can provide during the day. And a lot of people I know work, and so that might not be possible. So you'd be amazed at the things that schools need after school and on weekends. So maybe reaching out to see how a person can be supportive and help children out in that sense. I also do want to stress, because right now people are kind of in remedial panic mode because of the failing schools list being out, and so it's really cool and popular to say, let me go and help out the best, let me do everything that I can do. And so I just encourage people to be realistic about their limits and abilities when jumping into these types of roles. But yes, definitely supporting children any way that you can whenever you see them, being a champion for them, being aware of what you say around children, especially about their education and their institution, is very, very important. And then lastly, our legislature works for us, and I mentioned how the failing schools list is a result or something that the Alabama legislature has put into place. And I would encourage people to reach out to your legislator and encourage them to retract that, because there's no need for both a failing schools list and the school report cards. So I would really encourage people, at the very least, to reach out to their local legislator and reverse this legislation.
Excellent. That's good. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed the interview. Eva, did you have any other questions?
No, I'm just grateful to hear. I learned a lot. I did not know that you could just go to the Parent Teacher Association and join and not have a child there. So that was news to me, as well as is giving me questions about, how can my church or even myself as an individual get involved that may not necessarily be having to take a huge organization to say, hey, I want to partner with the school, but just one person going to say, hey, I want to join the PTA. What can I do? So this was great.
Great. Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. So thank you for this opportunity.